Shaquille O'Neal, the towering basketball legend known worldwide simply as Shaq, was no stranger to the limelight. His imposing 7'1" frame and infectious charisma often turned heads wherever he went, and that morning at the airport was no exception. Dressed in a tailored gray suit with a crisp white shirt, Shaq moved through the terminal with a calm authority that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy of travelers hustling to make their flights. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. His destination was a charity event in New York City, where he was slated to surprise underprivileged kids with scholarships. While the flight was just another leg in a life filled with endless travel, Shaq was looking forward to a quiet first-class experience. He had a seat by the window, a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice waiting for him, and noise-canceling headphones to escape the world for a few hours. But the peace Shaq envisioned for this flight was shattered even before takeoff. As passengers filed into the first-class cabin, a man in his late 40s with a sharp jawline and an air of self-importance entered. His navy blazer and pressed khakis screamed affluence, but his eyes held a flicker of disdain as they landed on Shaq. His name was Brian Lambert, a commercial airline pilot flying as a passenger that day. Lambert, while outwardly successful, was a man brimming with bitterness. His career had plateaued, and he often blamed his lack of promotions on what he perceived as unfair diversity hires. He seethed at the sight of successful black individuals projecting his own shortcomings onto them. The moment he recognized Shaq, Lambert's expression darkened, and the disdain on his face transformed into something far more venomous. Shaq felt the weight of Lambert's glare but chose to ignore it. He had dealt with far worse in his life. Racism was a shadow that loomed over his rise to stardom, but he had learned to respond with grace, humor, or silence, depending on the situation. Yet something about Lambert's demeanor felt more hostile than the casual bigotry Shaq had learned to endure. Lambert found his seat 2 rows behind Shaq, but that didn't stop him from muttering loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Unbelievable," he scoffed. "They'll let anyone into first class these days." Shaq heard him but continued to sip his juice, pretending not to notice. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the brewing tension. The flight attendants, busy preparing for takeoff, were oblivious to Lambert's remarks. As the plane taxied to the runway, Lambert's muttering grew louder and more pointed. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you," he sneered. "Bet he didn't even pay for his ticket." Shaq, who had grown accustomed to such microaggressions, continued to ignore him, but the atmosphere in the cabin grew thick with unease. A young woman seated across the aisle from Lambert finally spoke up. "Excuse me, sir," she said firmly. "That's enough." Lambert turned to her, his face a mask of feigned innocence. "What? I'm just making an observation," he replied smugly. The woman opened her mouth to respond, but Shaq raised a hand to stop her. "It's all right," he said, his deep voice calm but commanding. "Not worth it." Lambert smirked, emboldened by what he perceived as a victory. For the next hour, he alternated between passive-aggressive comments and outright insults. Shaq remained stoic, refusing to give Lambert the satisfaction of a reaction. But as the flight leveled out at cruising altitude, Lambert decided to escalate. The seatbelt sign had just turned off, and passengers began to settle in for the flight. Shaq had just reclined his seat and put on his headphones when Lambert rose from his seat and marched toward him. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" Lambert spat, standing over Shaq. The cabin fell silent. Passengers turned in their seats, their eyes darting between Lambert and Shaq. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, but before she could intervene, Lambert leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "You don't belong here!" Shaq removed his headphones and slowly stood up, towering over Lambert like a mountain. His expression remained calm, but his presence was undeniably intimidating. "I'm going to ask you once to sit down," Shaq said, his voice steady but firm. Lambert scoffed and shoved Shaq's chest, a move that felt more symbolic than impactful, given the sheer size and strength difference between the two men. The cabin erupted in gasps. The flight attendant, now standing just a few feet away, spoke sharply. "Sir, return to your seat immediately or we'll have to involve law enforcement." But Lambert wasn't done. Fueled by anger and humiliation, he lunged at Shaq, swinging wildly. The former NBA star reacted instinctively. deflecting the blows with ease and holding Lambert at arm's length as though he were a petulant child. Shaq's restraint was remarkable. He didn't strike back, didn't raise his voice. He simply held Lambert in place until two flight attendants and another passenger pulled the man away. Lambert was subdued and escorted to the back of the plane, where he was forced to sit for the remainder of the flight under the watchful eyes of the crew. Shaq returned to his seat, adjusting his tie as though nothing had happened. The cabin erupted in whispers, and several passengers approached Shaq to apologize on Lambert's behalf. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," the young woman from earlier said, her voice tinged with shame and sadness. Shaq smiled at her warmly. "It's not your fault," he said, "but thank you." As the flight continued, a curious shift occurred. Passengers who had initially been too uncomfortable or afraid to intervene began to speak openly about what they had witnessed. The collective condemnation of Lambert's actions seemed to bring the cabin closer together, a shared acknowledgement of the importance of standing up against hate. When the plane landed in New York, law enforcement was waiting at the gate. Lambert was escorted off the plane in handcuffs, his face pale and his bravado extinguished. Shaq, on the other hand, exited the aircraft to a round of applause from his fellow passengers. He waved it off with a laugh, ever the humble giant. Later that evening, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Videos recorded by passengers went viral, showing Shaq's remarkable restraint and Lambert's unhinged behavior. Social media exploded with praise for Shaq and condemnation for Lambert. The incident sparked a national conversation about racism, privilege, and the importance of speaking out. Shaq, for his part, remained characteristically humble. In an interview the following day, he said, "Look, I've dealt with this my whole life. It's nothing new. But I hope this serves as a reminder that we need to treat each other with respect. Hate has no place here, on a plane or anywhere else." Lambert's career as a pilot came to an abrupt end. The airline he worked for issued a statement condemning his actions and terminated his employment. Meanwhile, Shaq's handling of the situation earned him widespread admiration and reinforced his reputation as not just a sports legend, but a role model for grace under pressure. The story became a powerful testament to the strength of character, the importance of standing up to hate, and the potential for individuals to create change, even in the most unexpected circumstances. For Shaq, it was another chapter in a life filled with challenges overcome and lessons shared. And for those who witnessed the incident firsthand, it was a moment they would never forget, a reminder that even in the face of hate, dignity and compassion can prevail. The incident aboard Flight 326 became a lightning rod for discussion, far beyond the confines of first class. By the next day, major news outlets had picked up the story. Headlines ranged from NBA legend Shaq shows remarkable restraint in face of racism to racist airline pilot's tirade leads to arrest. On social media platforms, hashtags like #StandWithShaq and #NoToHate took over timelines, with millions of users expressing their outrage and solidarity. But the story didn't just resonate online, it rippled through communities, workplaces, and even governmental bodies. The Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) released a rare statement condemning Lambert's actions, reiterating its commitment to ensuring airline safety and maintaining professionalism among pilots. It wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a wake-up call for an industry and society at large. The airline that employed Lambert was quick to address the incident. Within 48 hours, the CEO appeared on television, offering a public apology to Shaq and the passengers of Flight 326. "We are deeply ashamed of the actions of one of our former employees," the CEO stated. "His behavior does not reflect the values of our company or the standards we hold for our staff." Effective immediately, Mr. Lambert has been terminated from his position, and we are conducting a full review of our training and hiring practices. While the apology was widely regarded as necessary, it wasn't enough for some. Activists demanded further action, including mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all airline employees. Shaq, in his ever-diplomatic way, declined to comment on Lambert's termination, but expressed support for systemic changes that would foster greater inclusivity. For Brian Lambert, the consequences were swift and unrelenting. The footage of him lunging at Shaq played on loop across news networks and social media, immortalizing him as a symbol of unchecked prejudice. He was forced into hiding as journalists camped outside his suburban home, eager for a statement. His family too bore the brunt of his actions. His wife filed for divorce within a week of the incident, citing irreconcilable differences and the unbearable scrutiny his actions had brought upon their family. His teenage daughter, previously proud of her father's prestigious career, found herself the target of ridicule at school. Lambert issued a written apology through his attorney, claiming he was deeply remorseful for his behavior and blaming it on a combination of work-related stress and alcohol consumption before the flight. However, few were willing to buy his excuses. His former colleagues described him as an abrasive and arrogant man, known for making offhand remarks about people of different races and backgrounds. "This wasn't a one-time thing," said one anonymous coworker. "He's always been like this. He just finally got caught." Shaq, meanwhile, continued his work as if the incident had never happened. After arriving in New York, he attended the charity event as planned, surprising children with scholarships and taking the time to meet each one personally. For him, the opportunity to inspire and uplift outweighed the negativity he had endured on the flight. When asked about Lambert during an interview later that week, Shaq deflected the focus from himself. "I don't want this to be about me or him," he said. "I want it to be about how we can grow from this as a society. Everyone makes mistakes, but we have to learn from them and do better." His refusal to dwell on the incident earned him even more admiration. Celebrities, athletes, and public figures voiced their support, praising Shaq's composure and using their platforms to amplify his call for change. In the days and weeks following the incident, the broader conversation around racism, privilege, and power dynamics gained momentum. Schools and universities used the viral footage as a teaching moment, incorporating it into discussions about race relations and conflict resolution. Companies across various industries revisited their internal policies, recognizing the need for proactive measures to prevent discrimination. On social media, individuals shared their own stories of encountering racism in public spaces. The hashtag #WhatHateLooksLike trended for several days, providing a platform for marginalized voices to share their experiences. While the incident on the plane was shocking, it became clear that many had endured similar moments of humiliation and dehumanization, albeit without the global attention Shaq's story received. The aviation industry in particular faced heightened scrutiny. Passengers questioned how someone like Lambert, with such deeply rooted prejudices, could hold a position of such immense responsibility. If he harbored such animosity toward black individuals, could he be trusted to make unbiased decisions in critical situations? Several advocacy groups petitioned for stricter psychological evaluations for pilots, arguing that personal biases could compromise their ability to perform their duties impartially. Airlines began implementing mandatory training programs aimed at addressing unconscious bias and fostering inclusivity among staff. The FAA also announced a new initiative to promote diversity within the aviation industry, acknowledging the need for greater representation of women and people of color in roles traditionally dominated by white men. While these changes wouldn't erase the pain caused by incidents like the one on Flight 326, they represented a step toward progress. Among the passengers on the flight, many felt compelled to share their own perspectives on what had happened. Interviews with these witnesses painted a vivid picture of the atmosphere during and after the confrontation. One passenger, an older man named Richard, admitted that he had initially hesitated to intervene. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "It's easy to say you'd stand up to a bully, but in the moment, it's intimidating. Seeing Shaq handle it with such grace made me realize I could have done more." Another passenger, a mother traveling with her young son, described how the incident sparked an important conversation. "My son asked me why that man was so angry at Mr. O'Neal," she said. "It broke my heart to explain racism to him, but it also felt like an opportunity to teach him about standing up for what's right." For many, the flight became a microcosm of the larger struggles society faces when dealing with prejudice, while some had initially chosen silence out of fear or discomfort. The collective outrage that followed served as a reminder of the power of unity in the face of hate. Months after the incident, the story still resonated. It became the subject of a best-selling book authored by one of the passengers titled "Altitude and Attitude: What a Flight Taught Us About Confronting Hate." The book, which featured contributions from Shaq, examined the event from multiple angles and delved into the broader societal implications. A documentary was also in the works, exploring the cultural and systemic factors that allowed someone like Lambert to rise to a position of authority despite his biases. Interviews with Shaq, the airline staff, and passengers from the flight promised to shed new light on the incident. Shaq, never one to rest on his laurels, used the platform created by the incident to further his advocacy work. He launched a new initiative called Rise Above, aimed at empowering young people to combat prejudice and promote understanding. The program included workshops, scholarships, and community events designed to foster dialogue and inspire action. During one such event, a young boy approached Shaq with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for standing up to that man," he said. "You showed me that even when people are mean, you don't have to be mean back." Shaq knelt down to the boy's level, his face softening. "Always remember," he said, "you can't control what other people do, but you can control how you respond. Be strong, but also be kind." The flight that could have been just another routine trip became a defining moment, not just for Shaq, but for everyone who witnessed or heard about it. It highlighted the enduring presence of racism in everyday life, while also showcasing the power of resilience, unity, and the human spirit. The world didn't change overnight. Prejudice, as entrenched as it is, doesn't vanish with a single act of courage. But in the aftermath of the confrontation at 30,000 feet, conversations began to shift, policies began to evolve, and people began to reflect. The incident became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in moments of darkness, individuals have the power to shine a light and inspire others to do the same. For Shaq, the flight was just one moment in a life filled with challenges and triumphs. But for the world, it was a moment that would be remembered for years to come, a testament to the power of dignity, the importance of standing up to hate, and the enduring impact of doing what's right. The story of what happened on Flight 326 didn't just fade into history as an isolated incident. Instead, it became a reference point in discussions about courage, dignity, and the necessity of challenging systemic racism in all its forms. The image of Shaquille O'Neal standing tall, not just physically but morally, remained etched in public memory. It became a symbol of grace under pressure and a rallying cry for those committed to social change. Communities nationwide began organizing town halls and forums, using the event as a springboard for discussing racism's impact on daily life. Churches, community centers, and schools invited speakers to talk about how subtle prejudices can escalate into overt acts of aggression, just as they had aboard that flight. Shaq's response, which emphasized patience and self-control, became a blueprint for how to respond to hatred without perpetuating the cycle of anger and violence. Artists and writers were also inspired by the incident, capturing its essence in various forms. A renowned painter unveiled a stunning portrait of Shaq in mid-flight, standing tall, calm, and unyielding, surrounded by a swirl of chaotic colors representing the tension and emotions of that fateful journey. The painting, titled "The Quiet Defender," was displayed in a major art gallery and toured several cities, drawing thousands of visitors moved by its powerful imagery. A filmmaker announced plans for a feature film dramatizing the events. Though the project was still in early stages, the buzz around it hinted at its potential to resonate globally. Actors and directors expressed interest, drawn to the story's universal themes of justice, perseverance, and humanity. As conversations about the flight deepened, the focus also shifted to the role of bystanders in such moments. For many passengers aboard the flight, their initial hesitation to intervene became a source of introspection. Sociologists and psychologists weighed in, discussing the bystander effect and how fear or uncertainty can paralyze people in situations requiring moral courage. Workshops and educational programs sprang up, encouraging individuals to take small but meaningful steps toward confronting hate in their daily lives. Simple actions, like speaking up, supporting the target of aggression, or even reporting the behavior to authorities, were emphasized as powerful ways to make a difference. Shaq's calm demeanor and the young woman's initial attempt to stop Lambert became examples of how courage can manifest in different but equally significant ways. In an interview a few months after the incident, Shaq offered deeper insights into his mindset that day. "I've always believed that strength isn't just about muscles or size," he said. "It's about how you carry yourself, especially when someone tries to tear you down. My mom used to tell me, you can't let anyone else's hate make you hate yourself, or them." That stuck with me. These words resonated with audiences, cementing Shaq's legacy as not just a basketball hero, but a figure of moral leadership. His message of resilience, self-respect, and compassion reached far beyond sports, inspiring people from all walks of life to reflect on how they too could rise above adversity. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a pilot attacking Shaq in first class? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.